Hi, Mr. Wyman. So, you might be wondering why I'm sitting here today. Well, to put it quite simply, I'm here to blow your mind. Brainstorming for my lunch project was quite difficult, but ultimately, my mindset was what would make the most impact in our world today. One thing led to another, and I figured, hey, the nuclear bomb is quite literally something that can wipe out the entirety of mankind, so here we are today. Here's the catch though. I am not an expert in the field. I barely know much about nuclear weaponry, much less study it avidly. However, I was able to get into contact with someone who was an expert in the field, Mr. Woodcarthy. Hopefully, through the interview that I conduct with him, we'll both be able to learn something today. I'll go get him right now. Hello, Mr. Woodcarthy?
Hi, how's it going?
Great. I'm joined here by someone who really wants to know more about the nuclear bomb, and I was just wondering if I could ask you a few questions.
Oh, of course. Fire away.
Great. So, generally, just to start us off, it's understood that the nuclear bomb came to be during a really difficult time. I was wondering if you could give us a little bit more background as to when that might have been and what was happening.
Well, you see, it was actually really violent times. As you may know, World War II was raging throughout the 40s. The United States was actually fighting this war on two different fronts, right? And though Europe was slowly falling into Allied hands, they also faced a very formidable enemy in the Pacific.
But how exactly did they come across the idea of using nuclear fission, nuclear weapons to produce unprecedented levels of mass destruction?
Well, you see, the concept of nuclear fission was actually initially discovered as early as the 1938, when Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann detected barium after bombarding uranium with neutrons. But given that this was before total war had broken out, these findings were shared with Princeton University in the United States, and as a result, a hypothesis was actually later developed among scientists and military leaders in which they believed that uranium-235 could actually produce a nuclear explosion, and the rest is history.
Cool. So, before we get too deep into the technicalities of the nuclear bomb, let's just talk about why this nuclear bomb was necessary, as well as the nuclear bomb actually did, not only World War II, but the global situation as a whole.
Oh, yeah, of course. So, after it was completely developed, two nuclear bombs were dropped on two Japanese cities to force an unconditional surrender: Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It was ultimately what ended World War II as a whole by obliterating the spirit of the Japanese.
So the horrors and the after effects of these bombs were catastrophic. Do you really think the United States was justified in that method of warfare? Especially considering that similarly catastrophic weaponry was actually banned by the Geneva Convention.
Yeah, definitely. So, you see, there is a lot of reasonable controversy regarding this topic, but what many people don't know about is what the alternative was. And there was actually a second plan to end World War II, a land invasion, which would have killed hundreds of thousands and would have made so many more people suffer, right? The Japanese had a policy of no surrender, and what that meant was, unless we completely crushed their spirits in an immediate act of defiance, in an immediate act of destruction, we would have lost countless lives.
Oh, that's really interesting. So what did end up happening?
Well, Little Boy, the 9,000-pound uranium-235 bomb, dropped on the city of Hiroshima, right, as we all know, and that destroyed nearly 5 square miles of the city instantly. It flattened the city entirely and vaporized over 70,000 people at once, right? It was quite horrific, actually, because not only was its destructive power catastrophic, but it emitted really powerful nuclear radiation that had been linked to the deaths of hundreds of thousands in Japan, specifically in those areas, in years to come.
So, coupled with the second bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki, that damage must have been largely unprecedented.
Well, that's what it was, right? An unprecedented weapon. Because of the nuclear bomb, we now live in a world where the world's largest countries are too afraid to engage in direct conflict because we now possess weapons that can quite literally wipe out mankind. It's amazing.
That's horrifying. I can't believe what it must even be like to even begin to conceptualize it.
Yeah, well, sometimes humanity's greatest inventions ultimately become our downfall.
So, let's get into the technicalities for a second. How does this thing actually work?
So one of the key concepts involved in the creation of a nuclear explosion was nuclear fission, which was discovered by the German scientist Otto, if you remember, in 1938. Just for those that may not be familiar with the concept, fission is when the nucleus of the atom is split into two or more smaller nuclei and releases a whole lot of energy as a result.
That's interesting. Please go on.
Right, so during the development of the nuclear bomb, they used the isotopes uranium-235 and plutonium-239. And the reason why these radioisotopes specifically were selected was because they both were capable of going through the process of nuclear fission, right? As well as being able to sustain a chain reaction that ensures. And how this process worked was that neutrons that they would fire would strike the nucleus of either isotope, which would split the nucleus into fragments and release unbelievable amounts of energy, right? The cool thing is that the neutrons produced by the initial atom strikes would then strike neighboring nuclei in what is considered a chain reaction.
That's amazing. I never knew that nuclear bombs were just a chain reaction of atomic explosions. It always seemed to be one instantaneous one.
That's because it might as well be, right? You see, these reactions actually happen in less than a second.
So how would one even begin to detonate a second nuclear bomb, and start this chain of nuclear fission?
Well, you see, it can be seen as a two-step process, right? First, chemical explosions are initiated surrounding a Saphir plutonium-239 or uranium-235 metal, right? Which are both of the isotopes that are used for nuclear weapons. Ultimately, these explosions actually push inwards, right? And decrease the critical mass of the metal while increasing its density because it compacts it together, right? And as a result, what happens is that this actually brings the atoms a lot closer together for the next step. What the next step is that once this happens, the neutrons are fired at the mass, and which initiates the fission chain reaction that I talked about earlier, and boom, boom, boom. Once it hits and starts interacting with neighboring atoms and fission starts creating a chain reaction, the large explosion that we know as the nuclear explosion occurs.
Amazing. Absolutely incredible. But there's another aspect to these nuclear weapons that I want to talk to you about. As we know, the nuclear radiation that's released from these weapons are devastating. But why is radiation released in the first place? Could you give us some more insight? Take your time.
Oh, yeah, of course. So, radioactivity, as we know, is the release of ionizing radiation and particles caused by spontaneous disintegration. One of the many ways that this happens is consequentially through nuclear fission. What ends up happening is that the big bursts of energy that I was talking about comprises various different forms, right? So 50% is released through a blast, 35% is released through heat, but there's a remaining 15% that's just quite simply radiation. The small moments through which the nuclear bomb detonates and explodes, gamma rays and neutrons, are spewed out over an incredibly long range. These highly radioactive fission products are dispersed into the troposphere, one of the components of the atmosphere, as we know, and linger for long, long periods of time, many times years and years, this exposing itself to any being that wanders in the area. That's why a lot of people ended up dying of radiation poisoning, of cancer, in the long term in these areas in the first place.
Fascinating. So, I recently read that there's actually another type of destructive bomb, the hydrogen bomb. I was wondering if you could go more in depth as to what that was and what the differences are.
That's fascinating. So, hydrogen bombs can become more than 1,000 times more powerful than an already catastrophic nuclear bomb. So, it's a very big deal. It uses a combination of both fission as well as fusion, which is the process through which you form a third atom through combining two separate atoms. While you still need uranium or plutonium, you also need two isotopes of hydrogen called deuterium and tritium.
Amazing. Tell me more.
So basically, the logic kind of resonates with how nuclear fission works in a way. So after the initial nuclear fission reaction happens, the energy released from that is used to set off a subsequent fusion reaction, which then releases a chain reaction of fusions, right? So when tritium and deuterium are fused together, the energy released by this process of fusion is 3 to 4 times greater than the energy released by fission. The more hydrogen isotopes you have, the more of a chain reaction you have, and the larger the subsequent outside explosion becomes.
That's incredible, and also quite scary. Should we be worried?
Yes and no. There are going to be irrational leaders out there, but the principle of mutually assured destruction, so if you attack someone and wipe them out, they're going to wipe you out with subsequent or greater force, ensures that, most people won't actually press that big red button.
Well, thank you so much for your time. That was amazing.
No worries, no worries. I'm happy to help. I'm happy to